all of a sudden it feels like these strategies to support them and to help them feel safe and secure enough to fall asleep have stopped working. It's not that the strategies aren't working, it's that they're not coupled anymore with tiredness. And so there's a bit of a conflict there, right? Your baby is like, I'm fine. We're doing great. I can keep going. And you're like, I'm looking at the time, I'm looking at the wake window, and I'm doing all the tricks that I usually do that work absolutely fine, slam dunk. It must be me. And no, it's not you. Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby's sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more. Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Baby Sleep Connection. I'm your host, Heather Boyd, and we are talking about a topic that comes up an awful lot with the clients that I work with one-on-one and in my group work. This is a podcast episode all about dropping naps. Now, it can be a doozy of a topic, right? We have a lot that we could cover. I'm going to keep it fairly tight to give you some of the basics around why naps get dropped, how they get dropped, and how to make it easier. I want to start by reminding you that every baby is different. And so often we'll look at the charts that are in the sleep books or Google how many naps should my baby be having and get really stressed out if our baby is not sleeping the number of naps that they're supposed to or sleeping the length of time that they are told a nap should be. So right off the top, I'm going to remind you that your baby may not be following the quote unquote guidelines in the books. I'm going to review what the general sense is. I would say what is typical, so at least you have a ballpark. But beyond that, it's important to know that there are some babies who are robust, chunky nappers, like nice long naps. Others are cat nappers, and there is nothing wrong with either one, with the exception that, of course, longer naps mean that we're spending less time helping our babies get to sleep relative to the amount that they're sleeping during the day, versus those with cat nappers are doing the whole nap routine pretty frequently because the number of naps is usually higher and the effort that's going in relative to what you're getting out can feel a little defeating. There is nothing inherently wrong with cat napping. As you know from previous episodes, adenosine is the hormone that it leads to sleep pressure. It builds and builds the longer that we're awake to draw us and our babies into sleep. Babies, of course, get that buildup of sleep pressure much faster than us. That's why they nap during the day. Of course, I will exclude any parent who is sleep deprived and tired and napping during the day, at least during this stage of parenting. For the rest of us whose kids have grown older, who have a full night's sleep, that daytime sleep isn't so important at this point, although it still can be absolutely lovely. I do want to review what I covered in the last episode, just so that you have it right here, what the typical, and this is a very broad term, number of naps at particular ages. From 0 to 3 months, we're really looking at sleep being spread out evenly through the day and night. So there's not really naps, there's just sleeping or not sleeping, and it happens throughout that 24 hours. By the time babies get to 3-ish months, there is a bit of a shape to the routine, and babies are often kind of getting 4 naps and maybe sleeping 4 to 5 hours during the day. Once they reach 6 months, that pattern gets to be a little bit more predictable. 6 to 9 months, we often, not always, often see 3 naps a day, and that total nap time during the day is less than it was. It's generally, again, very loosely typical to have 3 to 4 hours of sleep during the day. For 9 to 16-month-olds, this drops down to 2 naps that total 2 to 3 hours during the day. And by 16 months to 2 years, many kids are only having 1 nap a day, and the total is 2 to 3 hours. Beyond 2 years, the nap could continue. The nap could be as long as 2 hours, but tends to get shorter. And another huge caveat when we talk about naps, we know, just like with sleep at night, there are cultural differences in naps, there are seasonal differences in naps, there are geographic differences in naps. So, for example, in some parts of the world, it is typical for elementary school students to still be offered a nap at school. I saw a nifty little picture of desks in China, I believe it was, that could be modified into a little elevated, almost like an elevated easel that students could rest their heads on during the day. And it was very typical. Of course, we know about siestas. If you haven't been to France, their lunch hours are very, very long, and I would expect that naps might be part of that long lunch hour where all the shops close. There's at least a rest time, rest and connect time. And I wouldn't doubt if there were some naps being taken during that period of the day. So know that this is going to vary a lot. That ballpark can help a lot to at least know what direction to face and when to kind of expect these naps to shift. In my clinical experience, I often see babies who are dropping naps early. That's part of what makes it a challenge for parents, is that the total sleep time is less than average, and that can cause some challenges in trying to shape sleep to look different than their baby actually needs. And certainly it can be difficult on parents who are already tired. If you are one of those parents, you know that I'm talking to you. You're exhausted, and then your baby drops a nap, or total sleep in the day drops, and you just don't know where to be able to get a handhold on managing your day as your baby's sleep needs during the day drop. So taking that ballpark, we do want to look at what is it that is leading to this inevitable drop in naps. Why does it look the way that it does? And how can we make this easier? So we know that naps are necessary for babies. We know that the nighttime sleep is circadian rhythm and sleep pressure. So the sun goes down. That's a very different kind of sleep than during the day. Sleep during the day is to relieve that sleep pressure. So adenosine rises in the bloodstream. It draws babies into sleep when that pressure reaches a certain height. Homeostasis, that balance, is gained by falling asleep, so that adenosine drops, the levels drop, and the lower they go, the closer we are, or our babies are, to rousing from that nap. My guess is that those babies that are cat nappers have sleep pressure that goes up and then drops really dramatically, really quickly with short naps. And those that are robust, chunky nappers that sleep for long periods of time, that adenosine just drops more slowly. And so that drawing from sleep into wakefulness again is a little bit slower. We know that as babies mature, inevitably that daytime total sleep need drops, and it drops because of that sleep pressure not rising the way it does when they're younger. And so eventually that sleep pressure is building so slowly that there are long wake windows before the next nap. And before you know it, that wake window is the entire day, right? That they're getting through the whole day without needing a nap. What makes that so tricky for parents? Because this is like, I feel like it's like juggling a whole bunch of balls, right? You have a number of naps during the day. Each one could be represented by a ball that you're trying to juggle, and you're trying to figure out how high to throw that one ball and when to move the next one over. And it can be easy to drop them all and to not really be able to make sense of what is happening with naps and how to lay it out for them so that their day and yours can go as smoothly as possible. So we know that your baby will be dropping naps eventually, and eventually not need them. One of the things I think we forget about when we look at these naps is this is not a fine science with naps. We already know that nap length will vary, the number of naps your baby needs will vary, total daytime sleep is going to vary. But when it comes to this inevitable unfolding of mature sleep and the dropping of naps over time, we sometimes forget that even though this is a normal process, that at some point your newborn will be a grade 7 student who typically wouldn't need a nap. We forget that despite this being normal, it is really hard because change is hard, and it's not a flick of a switch to move from one set of naps that are particular times and a particular length to another set. So even though it is normal, it can feel really difficult, and change is wobbly and wonky and messy and sloppy because we're not given, it's not a precise science. So we're not given this printout of exactly when our baby is going to need one last nap. It will ebb and flow as well. So they may drop a nap for a time, or you think they've completely given up on naps entirely, and you start adapting to that idea that there is no more daytime sleep for you. And then all of a sudden, or for your baby, which means possibly daytime sleep for you, or doing something else while your baby is napping, even if you are contact napping or nap trapped. In the end, it's helpful to remember that despite it being a normal unfolding of sleep maturation, that it can be really challenging. And when we are prepared for that, it can be a little bit easier to be flexible and accepting of that messy middle between one kind of predictable routine that you may have moving towards another. So let's talk a little bit about how naps get driven. Now, as I was preparing for this podcast, I was thinking, what are the drivers of dropped naps besides development? Because it's not just our babies. Your babies are part of your family microcosm, right? Your family culture, your family flow to the day. So it may be largely dictated by them, but not entirely. And so I have three, forces that I would say are impacting this nap dropping. The first is that dropping naps can be parent driven, or parent led. And this is when you as a parent may be seeing what is happening and actively shaping the daytime sleep in a number of ways that we are going to get into. Often when parents are driving it, it's about balancing out parent needs with baby needs. It's not right or wrong. Again, it's part of a family system. The second pressure or force that would lead to naps dropping is what I would call circumstance driven. So obviously these overlap because if it's circumstances, then parents may be actively shaping the way that naps are unfolding during the day. But the circumstances that might be driving a change in your baby's nap schedule may be things like daycare, where naps are offered at a particular time at daycare and your baby is expected to and needs to at least somewhat adapt to the routine that's at the daycare. It may be that there are siblings in your home that have a different nap schedule or that have school pickup. Your work schedule may dictate that naps that would normally, if you were at home, be offered at particular times for your baby may not, just out of necessity. So those circumstances may drive a lot of how the naps are shaped. And the last, of course, is baby-driven or baby-led. And that means that as their need drops, so do the naps. And we, as parents, react or respond to this change rather than actively changing it ourselves. Now, obviously, these three overlap a lot, but it's helpful to pause and just think about where this nap drop is coming, because it does impact how hard you may be trying to make this happen, how understanding you are about whether what you're trying to shape is fitting what your baby needs. Of course, in the ideal world, we would be able to give our babies naps when they need them for however long they need them. But there are often circumstances that are either external, like the daycare issue or other siblings, or parent-driven, like the need that you may have to have rest or to be able to manage the other pieces of your life that may drive this. And as well as you simply recognizing that something is shifting and you want to see if you can shape daytime sleep to see how it might impact nighttime sleep. We know from previous episodes, how much sleep does your baby need? I think that was episode number 13, the last episode, that sleep will move towards nighttime sleep over time, regardless of what you do. And that there can be a balance between what your baby needs and how active you are in shaping that to make it work well for your family. So what does it actually look like when babies are dropping naps? Well, chances are most of you listening probably have had at least one nap start to drop from the routine that you have. Unless you are expecting or your baby is a newborn, it's not very long before these naps start to take shape and start to drop. So some of this will be familiar to you, but every time a nap gets dropped, it can be unsettling and confusing and overwhelming and difficult. So it's worth understanding that this is not an on-off switch. It's not typically that one day the nap is there and the next day it's gone. It is a slow change, a gradual change for the most part. The other thing that happens as naps drop, or as you move towards a point where a nap is going to be dropped, is you often see nap resistance, right? Your baby is simply not tired when they used to be during the day, when you expect them to be. And that nap resistance, again, is related to adenosine. It's not building up the way it was, so they're not tired at the time that you're expecting. And it's that longer sleep latency. It's going to take longer for them to fall asleep, so they're fighting it. They don't feel tired. What worked before to get them to sleep stops working as well, whether it's nursing or bouncing or cuddling with them. All of a sudden, it feels like these strategies to support them and to help them feel safe and secure enough to fall asleep have stopped working. It's not that the strategies aren't working, it's that they're not coupled anymore with tiredness. And so there's a bit of a conflict there, right? Your baby is like, I'm fine. We're doing great. I can keep going. And you're like, I'm looking at the time, I'm looking at the wake window, and I'm doing all the tricks that I usually do that work absolutely fine, slam dunk. It must be me. And no, it's not you. It's that sleep pressure is just not building as much anymore. What we're also seeing, of course, is the longer wake windows. As fewer naps happen, there's more time between naps, and we'll talk about the benefits of that when we talk about, so often we look at the negatives of dropping naps, not having that downtime as a parent to do other things or to simply rest yourself. But we're also often seeing longer bedtimes because they've topped up all this sleep during the day that they may not quite need. They don't need as much, but they're still getting it. So they get to bedtime and that sleep pressure isn't high enough either because of all the daytime sleep. Keep in mind that it's partly sleep pressure and partly total sleep over an entire 24-hour period. So if they're getting a bunch of sleep during the day that they may or may not need, they're not going to need it at night. And so there's a lot of longer bedtime routines, some resistance at night. For toddlers and preschoolers in particular, you're going to get a lot of the delays. I don't like to call them delay tactics because so often asking for that glass of water, asking to go to the bathroom again, asking for one more story is partly perhaps because they're not tired, but so often it's also because of separation, right? That time of the night when they're being expected to separate from you for a very long time. And that separation is through sleep, is through unconsciousness. And so there can be resistance just from that alone. But certainly if babies are not tired enough, that resistance is increased, right? It's that separation is not wanted and there's nothing physiologically happening that is pulling them into sleep naturally. And with that, of course, often comes later bedtimes, which can be a real challenge for parents who are already sleep deprived or really need to kind of tap out and have a little bit of time to themselves or with their partner or to do something or go to bed themselves. It can be real difficult when that bedtime gets pushed later and later. So that's what it looks like. But now let's talk about how to make it easier, because this is a long process, right? When we look at the layout of what is typical for naps, we're looking at naps being part of the picture for 2, 2.5, 3, even 3.5 or 4 years, even longer in some cultures and some families. And so this is a long, slow game to get to know naps. So let's talk about ways to make it easier. One is And we know this from the research, as best as researchers can speculate when they look at how parents are doing around managing their baby's sleep. When we know that change is expected and that change can be challenging, then we can be more mentally prepared for the change. We know that there will be periods of time where your baby is cranky and off routine because they don't quite need a nap, and then they're moving into that zone of wakefulness that we talked about in an earlier episode. I think it was last episode as well, where they're not able to sleep later in the afternoon or early evening. They need to sleep because they've been awake for a longer stretch. They are having trouble making it all the way to bedtime, but they're in that little messy zone of giving up that nap. Change can be hard. And I think when we can anticipate that, we know that it doesn't mean it's something to fix. It is part of the process of moving from sleep evenly spread throughout a 24-hour day as a newborn to a grade 1 student who may only start napping on those days that they're either under the weather or they are starting school or there's another big transition for them. The second thing about making it easier is to remember that it's not all or nothing. That flip doesn't get switched, or that switch doesn't get flipped to go from 3 naps to 2, and then it's set and it's 2 for a period of time before it drops to 1. What I noticed with my kids, and I want to talk about my third child in particular because I remember this so well. When he was down to 1 nap, and then it was clear that 1 nap was getting close to being dropped, it started out getting dropped once every 4 or 5 days. Like it would just be, he's just not going down for a nap. So we're not going to work too hard at this because it doesn't seem like he's tired. It's not like he isn't napping regularly. So we're just going to trust that the sleep pressure isn't high enough for him today. But it was like 1 every 4 or 5 days. And then eventually it was a nap every other day. And so that, of course, takes some flexibility and some adaptability on your part, because on the days that he napped, bedtime was later. And on the days he didn't, we had to really make sure that we were ready for an earlier bedtime. He was a kiddo that if he was overtired, it was like ballistic. And it was purely from just missing that ideal bedtime. And so when the nap was being dropped, we had to be really flexible about when to offer bedtime, when to be prepared to have him in bed, and be open to him not being ready yet and it getting bumped, especially on those days when he had a nap. And eventually, it was very interesting. And I logged this because I do that. I like keeping notes. I'm also a sleep coach, so it was very fitting for me to be recording this. I kept notes that eventually he would literally have 1 nap every 10 days. And it was almost like it was almost a period of his development where no nap was needed, but not quite. And on those days, of course, what would happen is I'd be busy making dinner. And so it's fairly late in the afternoon or early evening. And I would see him pull a pillow and a blanket up onto the couch, crawl up onto the couch, pull the blanket on and fall asleep. Or he would literally just kind of almost like a possum or a sloth, I guess, over the arm of the couch. He would just drape himself and let himself fall asleep there. And I remember this so well because I would be chopping onions or sauteing something in the kitchen or boiling pasta. Not exactly a good time of day for me to be trying to keep a preschooler awake. So I had a decision to make, and I knew the decision would impact bedtime or dinner, one or the other. And I would see him fall asleep and think, okay, he obviously needs to sleep. It feels good for him to fall asleep. This is something that was not true for all of my kids, and certainly not true for many of you who are struggling with your baby's sleep. But this kiddo of mine had a really good relationship with sleep. When he felt tired, he knew that sleep felt good. When he was awake, he knew that play and movement felt good. And so if he was choosing sleep, I wasn't bringing him up to his room. There was no routine at this point for naps. If he felt drawn into sleep, I wanted to honor that. And then I could still make dinner, and dinner was still going to get on the table. And yes, on those days, he would wake up cranky and disoriented because he was moving into that period of the evening where he was still sleeping, but moving into that zone of wakefulness. You wake up, and I'm sure you've all been there. You wake up, you don't even know what day it is. You don't know what time it is. You have no idea how long you've been asleep. And there's not a lot of runway leading up to bedtime. So we needed a lot of grace to know that this was a balancing act of letting him sleep when he needed to sleep for a nap, and then understanding that bedtime might be wildly late. And to anticipate that, that goes back to point number 1, to know that the change is going to be wonky and it's going to be hard, is to know that that bedtime was going to be late. And we could either fight it and try to make sleep happen at his regular bedtime and pull out all the stops to make the bedtime routine really rigid and to have really clear expectations about staying in the room, or we could lean into the idea that his sleep need had been met for now and that bedtime was going to be much later than what I would have liked. But leaning in, just from my perspective, felt so much easier than going against his natural sleep at that wonky period of time. I also want to talk about embracing the process. This is a nice launching point for this point, because we so often covet these naps, right? It is a moment in the day where we can perhaps have that actually hot cup of coffee from the microwave that's been heated up 4 times. We might be able to return some emails. We might be able to nap with our child or get some rest in some other way, or tidy up anything. It's that break that we get. And so giving up naps psychologically can be a real oh my goodness, if they don't nap, then I have no time to myself. I want you to keep in mind that while all this is happening, there are other areas of your child that are developing too. Their play skills, their communication skills, their movement skills, their ability to play even for a few moments on their own. These skills are developing at the same time that their sleep is developing and those naps are dropping. So it may be that a little shift in that, reframe of what this looks like, to know that as their naps are dropping, there are other amazing things happening, and that those amazing things may actually help you leverage a different way to spend that time in a way that still can give you rest, not in the same way, still allow you to do something else that needs to be done. The other piece that is, I think, really positive that I don't often see in social media talking about the benefits of the dropped naps. But if you think about the challenge of creating that runway to a nap, so transitioning into a nap and transitioning out of a nap, as naps drop, you're spending less and less of your time helping your baby transition into a nap and helping them transition out. And so for me, I still remember as those naps were fading, it became really quite wonderful to have my entire day open up. We could decide what to do when and where. And so not having naps really opened up the flexibility of what we could do. Of course, there is that period of time when babies are dropping naps, especially those last 2 naps, and most especially that last nap, where it doesn't take much to tip them over into sleep, even if they don't really have that sleep pressure. So something like a car ride depending on which way you're looking at it or what your aim is, the right or wrong time for that car ride could lead to a nap that they wouldn't otherwise have. And that can mean that for a period of time, that challenge of needing to shape your day in a way to avoid those periods or those lulls that would lead to a nap that they don't need. I remember vividly we were camping when naps were still needed, but if he had one any later than 1:30, bedtime was a gong show, but he didn't really have a lot of sleep pressure at 11:30 or 12. I think anything later than 1 was a problem. And so I strategically planned car rides at noon, and he would fall asleep right away. We'd get where we needed to go, get some takeout coffee or whatever it was, and a snack for the older kiddos, and he'd get his nap in, and then we'd have that long afternoon, that long wake window after to lead up to that sleep pressure and building that melatonin in the evening for nighttime sleep. And so I was very strategic. And there were periods of the day where I did not get him in the car at all because I knew he would nap. Of course, these are periods of time. It doesn't last forever. So it's a period of challenge where you're needing to be adaptable. I want to talk a little bit about the adaptability piece, because as naps are getting dropped and there's an impact or that rippling forward, if you think of a nap as being like dropping a pebble in a pond and that ripple effect that it has on the rest of the naps for the day or nighttime sleep. And you think, okay, like when do we want to help these pebbles drop into the pond so that the ripples are smooth, that the rest of the day goes smoothly? And one of the analogies I use with my clients, and yes, I'm doubling up on analogies here. If you've worked with me at all, you know I use a lot of metaphors. So I've talked about the pebble, but we're going to talk about another water-related analogy, a floating dock. So picture a dock on a shore it's not a fixed dock. So it's a dock that floats. It's still secured to shore, but as the tide comes in, that dock rises up. And as the tide goes out, the dock lowers. And I want you to think as your baby is dropping naps, especially again, moving towards dropping all naps, that bedtime is like a floating dock. If your baby has a nap, that's like the tide coming in and the dock goes up. Bedtime is going to be later. If they don't have a nap, it's like the tide coming out and that dock is going to lower. Bedtime is going to be earlier. Now, I always suggest to parents who are in this messy little middle between dropping naps or during that process of dropping naps to be prepared for bedtime. Anticipate that bedtime will be close to the typical time, but expect that it may be later. And that way you can still have that unfolding of your evening in the predictable way to be going through the bedtime routine. If it turns out that it is clear that sleep pressure has not been built enough, you can move out of the sleep space, do some quiet play, or go for a walk. I mean, it's summer now here in the Northern Hemisphere, going for a walk on a nice evening to get that last little bit of fresh air, if it's not too muggy, to have that sun setting where that red light from the sunset helps with the production of melatonin. Get out of the room and try again in a little bit, but think again of that floating dock that you're going to expect that it may be early, but it may also be late. And if you've done the routine, you've gone through, you won't be caught as often in ways that my spouse and I were often caught, which is to assume it was absolutely going to be a late bedtime, and then we made it a little too late. And for some kiddos, that feeling of being tired is so uncomfortable that it can lead to a lot of tears and a lot of upset and a lot of lack of cooperation because nothing feels good in their body. And so starting that routine early and then either lengthening it out or taking a break and coming back to it later can help you manage through this flux, right? It really is a period of flux. But I would encourage you to look at this as you're creating something individual for your baby and your family based on your baby's unique temperament and sleep needs and your family's unique needs too. If something doesn't fit right with what I'm saying today, either with the expectations around numbers of naps or what strategies may work for you or not work, keep in mind that you are the expert on what your baby needs. You know them better than anyone else. You can also trust that they're doing the best they can to communicate their needs, especially as they continue to develop and gain an understanding of what's even happening in their bodies. So to understand that creating something that works best for you is about taking some of these suggestions that seem to resonate best and giving them a try, applying them, seeing what it's like to think of it this way or to try an actual strategy. The goal is to make this whole messy process of sleep development just a little bit easier, a little bit smoother, perhaps a little bit more predictable because you know what to look for and you know what to expect generally. But this is really a unique path that you're taking that is going to be unlike any other families. So take what is useful, leave the rest, and look to your instincts and look to your baby for the clearest answers that you can have about what's needed. Wishing you a wonderful night's sleep. And if you are navigating this nap dropping period of time with your baby, I'd love you to reach out. You can email me at heather@heatherboyd.ca. I also encourage you to follow the link in the show notes to be added to my email list. That is the way to find out about upcoming events and opportunities, to hear some more sleep stories as I have applied what I know to my understanding of how we navigated sleep with our boys, and to get the reassurance in those emails that you are doing a wonderful job. Best wishes, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.